and so you had Taliban commandos, you had people who nominally belonged to the Taliban who came to talk to him.
Also in the house, watching the Taliban come and go, was American James Ritchie, who was trying to get Haq support from US representatives in Pakistan.
When I first got to Peshawar, we were working very hard to get some concrete support for him, and I made daily visits to talk to the consulate officer in Peshawar, who was a very savvy man, who'd been in Peshawar for over 10 years, who understood all the players, not only thought that Abdul Haq should be supported, they thought Abdul Haq was the best leader for the country. They highly respected Abdul Haq. They didn't understand why he was not getting support. And they would, in turn, send a message to Washington, and they would get some message back. And finally, after about 2 weeks of this, they gave me a message in writing that said, why is he sitting there in Peshawar talking to the press and not doing something? And why is he playing Hollywood Hawk again?
The CIA denied Haq the chance to allow the Afghans themselves to mount their own campaign. Instead, the US and British governments relied on the one thing that Haq had tried so hard to avoid, the bombing of Afghanistan by foreign powers. 50 cruise missiles were launched on the first night, side by side with bombing raids against Taliban and Al-Qaeda positions.
Our role is to protect America, and that's what we're going to do. We're going to destroy a lot of things over there. Come on. We're gonna bomb them over there.
But while understanding the need for revenge, Abdul Haq felt that the bombing would make the removal of the Taliban more difficult.
He felt that the bombing had a pretty significant detrimental effect in terms of well, it rallied people in some ways to support the Taliban. Once it was viewed as an American action, that made things a lot tougher from the standpoint of the real Afghans that wanted their country back, because now there was this split feeling about who were the good guys and the bad guys.
The atmosphere was tense in the house. Everyone knew that he was a prime target. He was under a great deal of stress. He told me one night, you know, he never knew if someone might walk in tomorrow with a bomb, if someone might park a car and blow it up, or the next time he walked out the door, if he might not get shot, and it was very tense.
By now, Haq realized that the US government was not going to help him and his men. He'd been left on his own.
Meanwhile, the CIA was supplying lots of money, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars, to commanders all along the frontier to go after local Taliban bases.
Haq had no military support, but he knew that with the West now backing warlords and the Northern Alliance, his dream of a broad-based government for all Afghans was in immediate jeopardy. He felt that he had to take action, as time was running out.
You know, he was a great poker player, so he might not have been as confident as he looked, but he was confident enough to risk his life doing it. But he knew he had a very dangerous window he had to get through. He had to get in with almost no one with him and virtually no arms, and first get a foothold. It's like, you know, like a beachhead. He had to get that done before he got snuffed out.
The risks were high. Haq knew that the Taliban would be tracking his every move. As a key part of Haq's plan, Arif Shahjahan was to lead the rebellion in the strategic town of Ghazni.
ما فکر میکنم که چون عبدالحق طالبا و کسایی که طالبا را سپورت میکردن، یعنی طالبای اصلی و کسایی که اونا را سپورت میکردن، مثل نیروهای القاعده یا کسای دیگه که اونا را سپورت میکردن.
Despite fears that he may have been betrayed, Abdul Haq set off with 21 men into Taliban territory.
He just kept marching straight ahead without help. You know, obviously It was a longer shot, but it was still a shot he had to take. You know, you feel kind of helpless sitting in the cheap seats while somebody else is in there with his neck on the line.
Haq's progress was much slower than he expected, as so many were angered by the American bombing. However, he was still gaining support, and a meeting was set up with the Taliban head of the Hisarak district, a crucial stepping stone inside the country.
مالک سره دا خبرې وکړې او هغه ویلې چې زه دغه خبرې هم ملاتړي ماجي صاحب عبدالحق ته ویلې.
Malik offered him 700 men at Shamshad and arranged to meet Haq the next morning at Hisarak to raise the banner and begin the rebellion against the Taliban. But before they could move to Hisarak, the Taliban had already been tipped off about Haq's arrival in the area and his intentions. Shawali Nasseri discovered that 350 Taliban soldiers were on their way from Jalalabad to look for Haq. As Shawali told Haq the news, the Taliban arrived. They were only a few hundred yards away, and so Haq and his men decided to retreat towards Pakistan. However, they then discovered that the roads were blocked and that hundreds more Taliban soldiers were on their way. The only way out was to walk over the mountains. Haq's men called James Ritchie back in Peshawar to see if he could mount a rescue bid. There were 2 helicopter landing sites nearby. Both Ritchie and Bud McFarlane called the CIA, but the CIA refused to send a helicopter. After walking for some hours, they reached a remote valley, only to find that there were yet more Taliban soldiers at the bottom. Some managed to escape, but with only one foot, Abdul Haq was captured with Shawali Nasseri. Their money and their phone was taken, and they were handed over.
طالب راجیک سه د راکټ لانچر واره پاجي صاحب عبدل حق په دې سر باندې په وکړه دی وګرځیده نو داسې وګرځیده دی به وښه نو زه بیا په دې وخت کې ورلم دی مې راجیک نو یو بل طالب تر پښتنه وکړه چې دا سړی د ملګری ده دا او د دې منطقې سړی ده نو یو بل هغه ورته وای دا د ملګری ده دا موږ له سره یو ځای راوستی ده نو بیا دی چې پرېښوده بیا بنا په ما باندې وکړه نو زه بیا په غېږه کې څملولم او د کلاشینکوف په کنداغو په دې خولو باندې وهل او پیل را باندې وکاو.
Abdul Haq and Shawali Nasseri were then driven towards Kabul. Just before they reached the outskirts of the city, a black 4x4 raced towards them. It flashed its lights, telling them to stop. In the car was the Taliban Minister of the Interior, Mullah Abdul Razak. When Haq's captors told him that they were taking him to Kabul, Razak intervened.
نابل مولوی ورته دی مولوی عبدالرزاق دا خبره ورته وکړه چې یا ګر سره باره دا خبره نشته چې دا کابل ته ولاړ شي او خبره دا ده چې که کابل ته لاړ نو کابل به پر بل مخ باندې چاپه کړي او دا راغلی د موږ د امارات د چاپه کېدو دپاره او د موږ امارات هېڅوک نشي چاپه کولی او بس دا سړی موږ ختموو چې ختم شي.
Razak then ordered the pickup to follow him. He turned off the main road down a long bumpy track and into a deserted area. Haq was then ordered out of the car.
هغه چې کوم وخت کې راکته کړه او هغه ته یې ویلې دا حاجي صاحب حاجي عبدالحق ته دا خبره وکړه چې اجازه ده هغه ورته دا د الله امر ده ما منلی ده خو زه د افغانستان د جوړېدو دپاره راغلی یم زه د ورانېدو دپاره نه یم راغلی دا خبرې چې وکړې ورته یې دومره خبرو ته یې مه پرېږده حرکت یې نشي ورکړی ورته مټې یې پرې واړولې سمدسته یې مټې پرې واړولې دې چې داسې راغی هغه داسې ولاړ و دا رقم ودرېده او ډز یې پرې وکړه ډز یې چې پرې وکړه نو مرمۍ یې د جنه راووته وغورځېده چې دی وغورځېده نو وروسته یې 2 3 4 5 ټکونه نور هم پرې وکړه نور هغلته ورته کېناسته 1500 جوړه یې پیتاس کړ 4-1500 جوړه غونډه چې داسې کسې غلبېل کې دا یې سر کوپړې له دې چې نیولې دا مازغه بالکل هېڅ شی نه و صرف دغه د مخې دغه جوینه لږ لږ پاتې سو نور هېڅ هم نه دا سر م هغه یې ختم کړه پې او نور یې ټول داسې سوری بدن مرغال کړ.
I bawled like a little baby. This was a very dear, this was like a brother to me, and it was just crushing to see him killed this way.
You know, there's so many emotions, somewhere between just wanting to weep and somewhere between being very angry and probably hopeless, depressed. Because when you can't even look to your own country that you value what they stand for, and when you're fighting both sides, it's a hopeless situation.
Before it all happened, I'd asked him one day, I said, Abdul Haq, what if you get killed in this whole thing? And he said, if I can just get the structure in place, it won't matter. It'll go on without me. In that respect, I think his death really wasn't in vain. I just had this feeling that he had done his job, he had lit the fuse.
Even after his death, Abdul Haq's men continued to carry out his plan.
The whole East, which was the core of his home territory, fell with a shot being fired, as far as I know, all the way from Sarobi clear to the border. And then the first major town of the south, Ghazni, was taken by one of the men in his network, Arif Shah Jahan, a guy armed with a satellite phone and $10,000 cash total to get the whole job done. But this was the guy that was the leader of the Hazaras in the Ghazni province. And so these men, it was like he had said would happen. They stood up and took huge swaths of territory with very little fighting after his death.
100% تغییر آورده میتونست. در اون زمان اگر غرب به ما کمک میکرد، یعنی ما تا سر افغانستان با تمام قوت‌ها ارتباط داشتیم. ما امی که بسیار مصارف جزئی نظامی از اونا را تهیه کرده میتونستیم. ما بدون اینقدر مصرف و اینقدر سر و صدا ما میتونستیم که افغانستان با تمام نیروهایش متلاشی کنیم طالبان را و افغانستان از چنگ از اینا آزاد کنیم و حتی ما آسان‌تر میتونستیم اعضای مهم القاعده را دستگیر کنیم. و ما کسی کمک نشد.
With the Taliban and Al-Qaeda on the run, and with key cities having fallen to Haq's men, the US and British forces then planned a campaign in the mountains of Tora Bora. Tora Bora was to be the final chapter in the hunt for Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda. The CIA and American forces believed that this could be their last stand. Abdul Haq's men, including two of his brothers, were poised to help. It was an area they knew intimately. However, the CIA and American forces spurned the opportunity that Haq had bequeathed. Instead, they spent millions putting their trust in warlords.
It was just another kind of example of something carried out by people from the outside that really didn't want to link up with the good guys in Nangarhar province, the guys who knew this territory much better. Abdul Haq's network had started out there. They're the guys that dug some of those original caves, and they knew Tora Bora cold, and they could have actually trapped people there. Everybody that knew Tora Bora said, what are they doing? There's not only a back door wide open, but the back door's hundreds of miles wide.
British journalist Ken Guest knew Tora Bora well, having spent many months there with Haq's Mujahideen during the 1980s.
Tora Bora represented the signpost to Pakistan. You can walk from Tora Bora to Parachinar in Pakistan in a day. I've done it. We had it well within our capacity and disposal to block the exit, and that was the road to Pakistan, on the border. If that's where we thought they were, that's what we should have done, and we didn't. The door was left wide open.
The door was left open because Pakistan had promised to seal the border and failed, and because the CIA's warlords didn't deliver. It was claimed that the whole purpose of the war on terror was to capture those behind the World Trade Center attacks, but Al-Qaeda had been allowed to escape. And the warlords were in an even greater position of power in Afghanistan.
It's the problem that seems to follow CIA operatives around the world, is that the guys that they can buy to do their bidding are not the guys that are best for actually the health of the country. And so there's a conflict of interests there, and the US money winds up going to bad actors and leaving these countries with terrible leadership.
With Abdul Haq's death, Afghanistan lost a potential leader who could have made a major contribution to the country and its future. He died aged 44.
ولا تحسبن الذين قتلوا في سبيل الله أمواتا.
When Abdul died, we lost something that we should have recognized, that we should have stood by. We should have recognized his banners at a great distance. They were those of honor, integrity, and honesty. And somehow we didn't. And it causes me great sadness to think that that can happen. That we can claim to stand by these banners and defend them, but not recognize the man that holds them. And all that he stood for. He represented everything that we stand for. And we betrayed him.
فالأحياء عند ربهم يرزقون.
The man's life was lost through the ineptitude of the CIA. And what a resource he would have been to have enabled us to have avoided this awful event.
It was a lost chance in 92. We walked away, and it was a lost chance during this period. If we would have responded creatively, energetically, we could have succeeded. Again, because the great majority of Afghan people supported this approach. Instead, we continued to outsource our policy to Pakistan, to the great disadvantage of US interests and Western interests, and indeed world peace and security.